The wind howled across the dry plains like a warning no one had listened to, carrying dust, silence, and the remnants of what used to be a thriving ranch. The old wooden gate creaked as it swung half-broken, barely hanging onto rusted hinges, and beyond it stretched acres of dying land, cracked soil, withered grass, and fences collapsing under neglect. This was once the pride of the town, a ranch known for strong horses and honest work. But now it stood as a quiet failure everyone had already given up on. Everyone, except one woman. She arrived just before sunset, her boots covered in travel dust, her eyes steady with a fire that didn't match the exhaustion in her body. She carried no luxury, no backup plan, just a small bag and a stubborn belief that she could change something the world had already declared finished. When she knocked on the door of the ranch house, it was opened by a man who looked just as broken as the land behind him. His face was hardened by disappointment, his voice rough as he asked her what she wanted. She didn't hesitate. "Work," she said. He almost laughed. Work? There was no work left here, only debts, failures, and ghosts of better days. But she didn't flinch under his disbelief. "Give me one chance," she said again, her voice calm but unshakable. "I won't waste it." The man studied her, trying to understand what kind of person walks into a dying place asking for opportunity instead of pity. Most people came here to leave, not to stay, and yet something about her refusal to look away from the truth of the place made him pause. He warned her it wouldn't be easy. There was no guarantee of pay, and the ranch might not even survive another month. Still she nodded, as if hardship was something she had already made peace with long ago. That night, under a sky heavy with stars, she stood outside alone, looking at the land not as it was, but as it could be. And in that quiet moment she made a promise, not just to the ranch, but to herself, that she would fight for this place the way no one else had. Because, unlike everyone who had walked away, she had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Morning came early and harsh, the kind that doesn't wait for readiness. The ranch woke slowly, like an old man reluctant to face another painful day. But she was already up before sunrise, her hands busy, her mind focused. She didn't waste time complaining about the conditions, she studied them. The dried wells, the malnourished horses, the broken irrigation system, each problem was a challenge, and she treated them like puzzles waiting to be solved. The man who had hired her watched from a distance at first, skeptical of her determination. He had seen hope before, and he had seen it fail. But there was something different about her. She didn't talk about change. She worked for it. She repaired what she could with her own hands, cleaned areas no one had touched in months, and slowly began bringing life back into small corners of the ranch. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't fast. But it was real. Days turned into weeks, and the smallest improvements started to show. One horse regained strength. One section of land showed signs of green again, and with each small victory, her belief grew stronger. Still, not everyone supported her. The nearby townspeople mocked the effort, calling it pointless, saying the ranch was already dead. Even the owner himself struggled with doubt, questioning whether her effort was just delaying the inevitable. But she never argued. She simply kept working. Late nights, early mornings, aching muscles, none of it stopped her. And slowly her persistence began to change something. Deeper than the land, it began to change people. The man who once doubted her started helping again, first reluctantly, then with quiet commitment. He began to remember what it felt like to care, and for the first time in a long time, the ranch didn't feel like a place waiting to die. It felt like a place fighting to live just when it seemed like progress was finally taking root. The storm came, both literal and unforgiving. Dark clouds gathered without warning, and within hours, heavy rain turned the fragile land into chaos. Fences collapsed, water flooded the repaired sections, and the little progress they had made was torn apart overnight. It was devastating. The ranch looked worse than before, as if mocking all their efforts. The man who owned the ranch saw it as confirmation of his fears. "It's over," he said, his voice empty, ready to give up once and for all. Even the townspeople shook their heads, saying this was proof that some things aren't meant to be saved. For the first time, even she stood still, staring at the destruction in silence. But unlike others, she didn't see the end. She saw the test. That night, instead of packing her things, she sat alone in the broken field, her hands in the wet soil. Her eyes filled not with tears, but with determination. She had known from the beginning that this wouldn't be easy. She had expected failure, but she had also promised herself she wouldn't walk away. The next morning, she was back to work. Not because it was easy, but because she refused to let one storm decide the outcome of her story. Her resilience did something powerful. It forced the man to confront his own surrender. Slowly, he returned to help her again, this time not out of obligation, but belief. Together, they started rebuilding, stronger and smarter than before. And something changed in that struggle. It wasn't just about saving the ranch anymore. It was about proving that failure doesn't define the end unless you allow it to. Months passed, and what once seemed impossible began to take shape. The land responded to their care, the horses grew stronger, and the ranch slowly returned to life. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. And sometimes that's more powerful than perfection. Word began to spread, not of failure, but of resilience. People who once doubted started to visit, curious to see how a dying ranch had survived against all odds. Opportunities began to appear, small at first, then bigger. A local buyer showed interest. Neighboring ranch offered partnership. And for the first time, the future didn't feel uncertain. It felt open. The man who once stood at the edge of giving up now stood beside her. No longer broken, but rebuilt, just like the ranch. One evening, as the sun set over the now green fields, he turned to her and asked the question he had been holding back for months. "Why didn't you leave? When everything told you to?" She smiled softly, looking out at the land they had fought for. "Because I wasn't just asking for a chance," she said. "I was proving I deserved it." In that moment, the ranch was no longer just a place. It was a story of persistence, courage, and the quiet power of someone who refuses to give up. And the woman who arrived with nothing but determination had not only saved the ranch, she had changed every life connected to it. Because sometimes all it takes is one person brave enough to say, "Give me one chance. I won't waste it."